Hello, and welcome to Stories from India, a podcast where we talk about myths, legends, and folk tales from India. I'm your host, Narad Muni, and I'm a mythological character myself. I have the gift of eternal life and knowledge of the past, the present, and the future. By profession, I'm a traveling musician and a storyteller. So the way I'm doing my job is by podcast. In this episode, we are doing a folk tale from South India. It's about a girl who married a tiger. This was a tiger who loved human cooking more than cooking humans. And he could magically transform into a human shape and talk and behave like a normal person. That might make you wonder if he was really a human in a tiger's body rather than a tiger in a human body. The story is set in a little village in medieval India. In that village lived a girl. Let's call her Samael. She lived with her parents and her 3 brothers. The parents were poor and could barely keep everyone fed. But their life was about to change drastically. The reason for that was that soon a very formidable character was about to enter their lives. Puli was a tiger who lived in the woods nearby. Puli had one obsession. He loved eating food. And I mean regular human food, not raw meat like other tigers. He really enjoyed plain old rice and lentils. The same stuff that you perhaps find boring, Puli would have moved mountains for. Every chance he would get, he'd ambush travelers passing through the jungle, only so that he could get at their picnics. But unlike some cartoon characters, he was ruthless about it. He'd kill the travelers too. Pretty soon though, people just started avoiding the jungle altogether. But Puli knew he must have food, so he used his powers to help him with this. Puli had the ability to shapeshift. He could make himself look exactly like a normal human being. And what's more, it extended to beyond just his appearance. Puli could understand the language of the humans and speak it in a completely normal human voice. And thirdly, Puli had knowledge of the scriptures. Despite all these powers, he couldn't figure out how to cook for himself. Or maybe he just thought it was beneath himself to do the cooking. He survived a few more days by visiting temples in human form and eating the handouts there. But he needed a permanent solution to his problem. As he was passing through the village, he saw Samael. His sexist tiger mind immediately pounced on the idea that because Samael was a girl, she must know how to cook. He kinda hung around outside her house, pretending to teach whoever would listen. And those who did listen were indeed impressed with the scripture knowledge of this stranger, who had the aura of a savage beast, and yet definitely looked and talked like a regular human being. Samael's family noticed him and invited him in for lunch. And then again for dinner. And then breakfast, lunch, and dinner the next day. Obviously, Puli enjoyed all the meals. Previously, he had been more or less restricted to rice and lentils. Now, because of these meals, Puli became aware of the possibilities across the huge spectrum of Indian cuisine. he kept thinking about how exactly he was going to abduct Samael. But luckily for him, and quite unfortunately for Samael, her parents provided Puli the perfect solution without realizing what they were letting her in for. They suggested that Puli marry the girl. Yeah, these were ancient times when the girl had the least say in the decision of whom to marry. But to be fair, in this case, Samael was not opposed to the marriage. She had admired Puli from a distance. All that was soon going to change. Puli and Samael were quickly married, after which Puli insisted that he would take her back to his home the very same day. And that was in a conversation he had with Samael's parents. No one asked the poor girl. She went along quietly with Puli. It was a very long walk, and she had no idea how much further they had to go. She asked Puli for a quick rest stop. But to her surprise, Puli, who was supposed to be her partner in sickness and health and so on, flat out said, "No, and get a move on, or I'll show you my real face." She let this slide, but when the same thing happened an hour later, she was beginning to think that maybe it had been a mistake to marry the stranger whom no one had known about until a couple of days ago, and who lived mysteriously far away near where a ferocious tiger was rumored to live. When, for a third time, Puli cruelly rejected her request for a quick rest stop, she lost it and said, "All right, I'm going to call your bluff. Show me your real face." The tiger did. He changed back into the ferocious tiger he was, and he nearly scared the wits out of Samael. She would not be asking for rest stops anymore. Anyway, it didn't really matter after all. They were almost at his cave now. He shooed her into his cave and then blocked the entrance with a seriously large boulder. "Your job," he said, "is to cook for me." "Cook for yourself," snapped Samael. But when Puli showed her how sharp his claws were and how he was really hungry, she quickly changed her mind. In no time, the new couple fell into a daily routine. Puli would go out all day and do regular tiger stuff: hunting, stalking, and in this case, getting groceries. It was Samael's task to cook 6 huge tubs of food for him every day. Scared of what Puli might do to her, Samael complied. She would cook all day, but as she got used to it, she managed to do it efficiently and spared time to write a diary. Only this was really long ago, so her diary was a set of leaves bound together. She scratched her whole story on the leaves with a nail. She detailed how instead of taking her on a honeymoon, carrying her over the threshold, and generally treating her like a queen, her husband had immediately launched into full-on domestic abuse. However, she hadn't lost hope. There was a tiny crow who lived right outside the tiny window of the cave. She had made friends with the crow because that crow could talk. When she had written out pretty much everything she could think of, complete with index, glossary, preface, appendix, she asked the crow to please take it to her brothers. "Samael, why didn't you just ask me to go warn your brothers?" I'm a talking crow. I can give them the message just fine. You didn't actually have to finish your diary. And speaking of which, oh my, this is incredibly heavy. But the crow was her friend. So he bore the heavy diary and shot off towards Samael's parents' house. The crow was utterly exhausted by the time he got there, and he could barely talk. He handed over the diary to the eldest brother. But the eldest brother hadn't actually gone to school and couldn't have read it. He passed the diary to the middle brother, who didn't want it either, because he had gotten into big trouble for reading her diary before, back in middle school. He wasn't going to take a chance. Besides, he didn't want to read his sister's diary. It was bound to be full of sentimental stuff about how much she loved her husband or some such. He passed the diary to the youngest brother, who read it right away, because he was curious and didn't know any better. He raised the alarm when he got to the part about his brother-in-law being a tiger and all. He quickly provided the gist to his brothers, and they set off immediately in the direction of the tiger's home. Along the way, they just happened to run into an ant, a donkey, a big iron tub, and a tree that had fallen. Because this story lacks some serious logic, they took all of those things with them. Don't try this at home, folks. Carrying a branch is hard enough. If you try to carry a tree, you're very likely to break your back. When they got there, Puli was not at home. Samael quickly asked them to hide in the loft. And they did. The tiger returned and did the whole fee-fi-fo-fum, I smell the blood of an Indian routine. Samael had to admit that her brothers were visiting. "Well, where are they? Why don't I hear them?" asked Puli. At that, one of the brothers instigated the ant to bite the donkey. This made an incredibly loud and distressing noise, which the tiger mistook for formidable, just as the brother had hoped. Now, for some reason, the tiger demanded that he see his guest's belly and leg. Oddly specific, but the brothers had just the right kind of pretend belly / iron tub and pretend leg / tree. They let Puli feel those. And that left the tiger feeling scared of his brothers-in-law. Even though just a few weeks ago, at the wedding, they hadn't seemed quite so large or so tough. Puli decided he might be better off not meeting them. He slunk away. And when he did, Samael and her brothers sneaked off back to their village, taking with them all the gold they could carry. Puli had accumulated quite a treasure from all those highway robberies. He had eaten the picnics and kept all the shiny stuff in his collection. When the tiger discovered that his wife and his valuables were gone, he guessed at what must have happened. He assumed human form again and dashed to Samael's parents' house, not at all worried about the size and stature of his brothers-in-law, who had bellies made of iron tubs and tree-sized limbs. Samael was at her parents' indeed, but she was prepared. She had a plan. She tried to convince her parents that Puli was actually a tiger. "Seriously, Mom and Dad? The clue is in the name. Puli means tiger," she told them. But they still wouldn't believe her. Ultimately, Puli did show up and asked to take Samael with him again. But Samael knew exactly what to do. She invited her husband in for a meal. She knew the tiger would not be able to resist human cooking. After the meal, Samael suggested that it was customary for the visiting son-in-law to have a massage outside in the yard. "Here," she said, "you can lie down on this carefully concealed circular bed with odd-looking foliage on top." Puli tried, but the circular bed was not a bed at all. It was the mouth of a well. He fell in and just couldn't get out anymore. That was the end of him. And that is the end of our story. Some notes on the show. The story omits many important details. It doesn't explain why Puli would go to the trouble of becoming a scholar but be unable to learn cooking for himself. And having become a scholar, how he could be easily hoodwinked by Samael and her brothers. And if he had so many valuables left over from his years of robbing and murdering travelers, why didn't he simply order DoorDash or Grubhub? There's an important element in the story that I have deliberately left out. That Samael and Puli had a baby together while she lived in captivity in his cave. The baby took completely after his daddy. He was all tiger, and this was a source of revulsion to Samael. Samael and her brothers did not simply leave the baby tiger sleeping behind when they escaped. I will spare you the horror by not describing what they did. Let's just say that they would definitely be banned from winning any tiger conservation awards in the future. The story is similar to the one from the French folktale Bluebeard. There are a few notable differences. While Bluebeard's end goal was to murder his wives, Puli not so much. Puli was interested in human food, and marrying Samael was merely a means to that end. Even when Samael and her brothers ran off with the valuables, Puli was probably more upset at the prospect of losing out on his meals than anything else. It's possible that the whole tale is an allegory, kind of like the book and movie Life of Pi. Puli may not have been a real tiger at all, just a great big brute. Again, I've used local names for the characters. Samael means a meal, and Puli is the word for tiger in Tamil. Sometimes a misbehaving child is warned by an adult that if they don't behave, they'll be shown the adult's real face. That may work sometimes, but only on children who have heard just the first part of this story. That's all for this episode. In the next one, we'll finally start discussing the churning of the ocean. It was a grand cosmic scale experiment, and we'll meet two of Vishnu's avatars that we haven't met before. If you have comments or suggestions, please leave a comment or a review on the site sfipodcast.com or tweet at sfipodcast. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook. Be sure to subscribe to the show to get notified automatically of new episodes. Thanks to all of you listeners for your continued support and your feedback. The music is from purpleplanet.com. That's purple-planet.com. I'll see you next time.